Everyone is vulnerable to being pinned when life plays hardball, whether it is a physical or mental health condition. No one can stand alone. For those who are not pinned, appreciate that it could be you or loved one someday. So when you see a chance to help someone, please do. They are not weak, they are pinned. Even a slight hand up and a listening ear can begin seriously lightening the load, change, or save a life. Help end stigma. Move from being pinned to purpose. Time for a hand up.
Hello, everyone. It's Jeff Moore. I'm the founder of the Pin to Purpose podcast, and it's a huge pleasure for me today to welcome our guest, Derek Covington. Just before I begin, I'd like to say I've known Derek for a few years now. We were introduced by a mutual friend, Anthony Besso, and Derek led some mindfulness workshops and a program that I took which was very, very meaningful to me. And in a moment, when you hear about his background, you'll see why he'll have a lot of fascinating insights to do with our podcast today. So just quickly, for those who haven't seen the podcast before, it is all about trying to eliminate stigma and give people a hand up on their healing journeys. And for those of you who are dealing with mental health challenges now or have mental health conditions, it's just a reminder that you're not weak. You can be in a weakened state dealing with all of these things, but there's never any shame or any reason not to try to reach out for a hand up. And a lot of people care. So Derek, thanks so much for joining us today. I might read a tiny bit of your bio. I've only put aside a certain amount of time, so it would be way too long to read a ton of it, but I'll read a little bit and then I'll hand it over to you to give our viewers a bit more of an introduction. So Derek's journey into the field of performance, well-being, and mindfulness has been a blend of passion, curiosity, necessity, and serendipity, and a journey shaped over a lifetime. It began in his early days as a national level hurdler, striving to qualify for the 1992 Barcelona Olympics. And 8 years after missing the Olympics as an athlete, he entered the Sydney 2000 Games as a performance manager, launching a 25-year career that has spanned 9 Olympic Games in high-performance sport. And since then, he has been very active as a head of performance, well-being, and mindfulness through various programs. He's an entrepreneur and a founder, and he has shared very actively a wealth of insights to do with mental health and mental well-being. And so, Derek, why don't I pass it over to you just to add to that and say a few words of introduction.
Alrighty, well, that was quite a nice introduction, Jeff. Thank you very much. Good to see you again, and great to be here on your podcast. And I really believe in the work that you're doing, and I'm glad that our journey has continued from the time when you took my MP course a few years ago now, and that we've been able to stay in touch. And here we are again today talking. So great to be here today.
Thanks so much. And Derek, maybe we can go back a bit in time, as I just described and as you've described about your journey, striving for the Olympics yourself as an outstanding athlete. And maybe you can talk a little bit about that journey, and then, the challenges of high performance athletes and in terms of their own, mental health and state of well-being, trying to achieve a very, very high goal.
Sure. And I used the word striving in the context of me going to the Olympic Games in 1992 very intentionally, because as a mindfulness coach now, it's all about non-striving and just sort of being present to what is. And if I were to refer back to myself in my early days as an athlete, I was very much attached to outcome and performances. My experience at the Olympic trials for the 92 Olympic Games was nothing short of me just sort of crashing and burning in that race, trying to make the Olympic Games. And so that was the experience that I had in that particular context, in that particular race. I had other moments where I was, you might be, say, in flow or in present awareness. But then, I think like any journey that anybody goes through, whether you're an athlete or in any kind of context that you might be working in, you can stretch yourself a little bit too thin and try to want too much and strive for perfection. And that's when you might get into a little bit of trouble. And so in my athletic career, I kind of had a bit of both for sure. And then I followed on with an injury and then sort of my kind of track career kind of went downhill. But then it kind of pivoted as you mentioned in the intro, just around turning that kind of uh, uh, failure, if you will, and then sort of turn 8 years later, then sort of being at the Olympic Games in Sydney, but in a different capacity. So my Olympic journey was still present, but it kind of manifested itself in a different kind of way. And to be quite honest, after my athletic sport career, I had pivoted in a completely different direction, and then I kind of found my way back into sport, and an opportunity came along, and then that led to my career in sport.
No, it's tremendous. I like the Muhammad Ali story, the red bike moment that he had, and the fact that sometimes our biggest setbacks can lead to our greatest triumphs or accomplishments, or, the fact that I definitely, listening to you, I know that it's certainly not a failure. I mean, you were an incredible athlete to get that far, but the fact that, you didn't make the games but you stuck with it and knew you could contribute at the highest levels, has led to really a fascinating career. And so I wondered if you'd like to give a few stories maybe, and you can start with Sydney or you can start later, talking about high performance, talking about, mindset, and, the mental well-being around Olympians or people
Mm-hmm.
striving to that level.
Yeah, and certainly my perspective on that has evolved over the years, and even as a sports system, we have been traditionally in Canada kind of very focused on outcome performances, and which then drove a certain mindset within how funding was allocated and just the priorities that everyone kind of puts on in terms of medals, or nothing kind of thing, and that perpetuated um, through Vancouver, through the last, maybe 10, 20 years. And then now there's sort of been a shift for sure since probably Rio, since 2016, where there's sort of been a movement around recognizing well-being and mental health in athletes. Certainly there's some high profile cases where it kind of shed a light on this, and that, okay, is it a win at all cost kind of mentality, and how we can kind of introduce mental health and well-being, and to also explain that it's not like at the cost of performance, that it's a kind of a positive sum game, that if you're focusing on your mental health and well-being alongside your performance preparation, that one can help the other. And so that shift has sort of happened, and is continuing to happen, and in terms of the languages and the programs and the priorities that organizations place through an athlete journey or through an organization's journey. Australia and has sort of coined the term win well. So okay, so you win, but is it possible to win healthy and win well? And then that's, like, well-being is a very personal, multi-dimensional concept. And so what winning well is for me would be different than it would be for you or for some other athlete. And it's around including that as part of an athlete's journey. But I think over my 9 Olympic Games, I think that there were good moments and very challenging moments. You're bringing 500 to 700 people together as a team on the other side of the world for a high pressure 2-week competition. The logistics and moving parts and expectations and accreditation allocations, and people arriving wanting to this is the top of their pinnacle of their, say you're a coach or an expert role, and then maybe you have to work with sort of less ideal conditions, or there's things that are not perfect as you would normally expect, and then people not coping well with that, and so or not adapting well. And so I think I've certainly appreciated over the years about the ability to kind of adapt to environments, to adapt to circumstances, to sort of accept things as they are, and then to work within them. And I think that has been, I think, key to both my role in a support staff role, but other mission team people that I've worked with. And I think it's also true equally for the athletes that have shown up and been present, for the experience, and then not being also distracted and taken away by the Olympic experience, but then also to remind yourself that you're there to focus on doing well on the track or on the basketball court or whatever it is. So there's just, in mindfulness, it's like being open and aware to everything, but then also focusing, your attention on what you need to focus your task on at any given time. And that kind of duality, and then being able to do both, I think, is probably the most important aspect of, of, I guess, thriving in a high pressure situation.
I'd like to ask you a bit about self-talk, because we talk, with other guests, we've also talked about that in terms of, stigma can also add another layer to people of negative self-talk, and really, feeling down on themselves and accepting that others are saying that they're not enough, regarding a mental health challenge or mental health condition, which this podcast, we totally disagree with that. But in sports, self-talk is hugely important too. And the mindset, getting back to self-talk and mindset. So I'm wondering if you can elaborate a bit on some of your views and experiences on the importance of, the self-talk, the mindset, et cetera.
Yeah, I think that there's, a narrative, um, storytelling that's sort of constantly happening. Um, and, in some cases, a narrative or storytelling can be helpful or it can be unhelpful. It can be, useful or not useful. It can serve you. It can not serve you. Of course, with athletes, it could be critical, or it could be compassionate or self-compassionate or supportive. And so whenever you've thought about a good mentor or a coach in your life that had supported you in your journey, that person might have used a certain tone or certain language to support you on your journey. And then you might have had other examples in your teacher or coach or mentor or somebody in your life that have used more harsh or critical words. And so, um, the research for sure has shown that, that self-compassion is more supportive to sort of being our best selves and reaching our full potential, and being a high performer. And so, people, it's like this sort of, old school, like you got to be tough on yourself and critical, um, has proven that, self-compassion can actually have a better outcome result, when practiced. And so I guess it's the narratives, whether they're negative or positive, are all there all the time. And it's sort of this cast of characters in your head that are narrating circumstances. Okay, this um, and in many cases, our thoughts impose limit on us. You see a draw in a tennis tournament, and you're like, okay, I'm going to lose. I'm going to win here, lose here, and then I'm out. Like you've already decided your outcome. By based looking at who you're playing against. And these are sort of things that just kind of happen, and they might be on automatic. And so I think even in my practice around mindfulness, it's just kind of bringing a mindful awareness to that. Just brings it to the forefront of your awareness, and then you can say, okay, well, maybe that's true, maybe that's not true. And so I think it's not about not ever having negative thoughts. It's not about never not having critical or self-critical thoughts. And that's part of the allowing part. It's like sort of acknowledging that I'm having this negative thought, or allowing that I'm having this negative thought, even accepting that you're going to have this negative thought. Every time you step on the track, you can have a negative thought or an unhelpful thought, or even a kind of an emotional reaction as well. And it's like, okay, well, you can develop a relationship with these things, and you're like, okay, I know you're going to come onto the track with me, this self-doubt and self-criticism, but you have an awareness of it at this point. You have an awareness of it, and you kind of befriend it, and you're like, okay, you're going to come along with me anyway, so we might as well just do this together, kind of thing. And then you kind of all of a sudden you try to change the dynamic with these things, and in terms of them, these negative thoughts not having kind of control over you, but you kind of being more sort of in the place to kind of choose where you want to pay your attention to, and that's another aspect of things, that you might have a negative thought, but maybe I'll put my attention on the sensation of breathing instead. Okay. And all of a sudden you're paying attention, you'd be paying attention to that negative thought. You're like, or okay, well maybe I'm going to concentrate somewhere else. That's also happening in my experience right now. And so there's sort of playing with sort of what's in the foreground of my attention versus what's in the background of my attention. And maybe the negative thought is still there, but you've now moved it to the background of your awareness, and you kind of move something else that's more pertinent or more helpful to what you might need to focus on at this point in time. So concentration is the ability to choose what you're paying attention to. And so it's not about being fixed and focused on X thing or X task, but it's this dynamic kind of ability to notice when you're not focused, or when you're not focusing on something that's not helpful, and then have this sort of muscle, if you want to call it that, to kind of to bring it into something that's more useful. So there might be, that's the other thing, when you're kind of doing kind of cognitive reappraisal of your thoughts or storytelling, you can, is it true? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, is there another thing that could also be true, like a positive version of this same scenario? And sometimes it's also about checking the facts, especially when it comes to rumination, when we're thinking about, oh yes, I think somebody doesn't like me anymore, or someone has, you kind of made up some story that it's not based on any kind of, so you sometimes just checking with the original source, and kind of getting your facts, straight, kind of thing, before kind of spinning into a spiral of rumination or anxiety or worry, kind of thing. So,
and this applies to everyone, these type of mindfulness principles. I mean, I took a class with you, a program with you, and so you don't have to be an Olympic athlete. I mean, everyone can use these types of techniques, as you said, based on their own unique circumstances and views, etc.
Yeah, 100%. I think that even the courses that I teach, whether you're an athlete or not, it's not really the point. The point is these are kind of skills, the muscles. We talked about concentration, attention, focus. That's kind of a key one, and it's something. It's a capacity that we can practice. So you can practice to be good at anything. You can practice to be good as a hurdler, or as a at learning Excel or whatever. And so if you can practice that, what I described earlier, you can practice at the ability to pay attention. Which we often kind of take for granted. Oh yeah, I know how to pay attention, but half of our day we're not paying attention, or and research has supported that, universally, that we're not paying attention to half of our day. So it's not about being mindful 100% of the day. That's not realistic. It's acknowledging that we're sometimes mindful, sometimes mindless. And then it's a sort of like capacity to kind of notice when we're not present, or notice when we're not paying attention. And that's the big part of actually being of mindfulness. It's noticing when you're not present, and then that's the rep. If you want to use a strength and conditioning kind of analogy, it's like that's the rep that we do. We're like, okay, and then we kind of we've given ourselves that little space where we're like, okay, in that little space we've created, we can sort of choose where to put our attention. So we can continue putting our attention where, in the negative space, or we can then choose to put our attention on somewhere that might be more helpful, and that's the muscle, the capacity that we can build.
I want to ask you a question that I've been thinking more and more about lately, and I'd like to have a comedian or two on this podcast, because it's the role of humor, in kind of decompressing or de-stressing or refocusing, and I'll give you one example, and then love to hear your thoughts. But for myself, I think I've told you I continue to compete as an amateur veterans tennis player. And a few
Very
years
good with
ago
that.
with my, yeah, I try. I'm not making any money, but I try and I have fun. But I did a couple of years ago with my partner, Christian Laurent. We made the finals of the Canadian National Doubles Championships and we lost in the finals. But that led us to be the first seed in the nationals the following year. The people that beat us weren't there. And in our very first round, we were losing 7-5, 4-0. And we looked at each other and we were so stressed because we thought we have a chance to win the whole thing. And we're probably leaving in the first round. And then we started laughing and we started joking with each other. And we said, look, this is unbelievable. Like if we're going to lose, we're going to at least have fun. And we started joking and we actually turned the whole thing around and won. And so, and I've heard recently more in terms of mental health and in terms of overall levity of these topics, because we're talking about heavy topics and people are in need of, breathing and getting joy back, et cetera. But I'm wondering in your Olympic experiences or your own training or your own views of like, and maybe this is happening after the training session when people are like de-stressing and joking around. But I wondered if you have any thoughts or examples on the potential role of, of just a little bit of humor in this process and comedy or joy and, to bring in the joy part.
Yeah, I think that performance anxiety or choking, we can kind of get in the way of our best performance. And so we already know how to play tennis and we sometimes overthink it and we have this expectation of performing at a high standard, higher than what we think we can. And so then we kind of get into this sort of blockage kind of situation. And so this is where getting out of our own way, and so this is where like this, separation of mind and body, and so quite often like that holistic whole person well-being. It's like, okay, how do you get out of your head and worrying about being down one set and love four, and how you can, okay, well, is there another part of your experience that you can put your attention on? So you could put your attention on your breath, you can put your attention on your environment, or you can put your attention on your partner, and say, okay, and then you can kind of shift. Okay, well, I like my partner, and we've had fun preparing for this tournament or over the years, and then you sort of start to kind of focus on other aspects of what gives you joy in what you're doing, and so you then start to remind yourself, when professional hockey players that I've worked with, when they get the expectation of and seriousness of play and winning and contracts and doing this and doing that, it's like, okay, you lose sight of like, playing shinny and why you got into the sport of hockey in the first place and just the love of it, and so the ability to kind of, and lots of athletes, will have gone through those ebbs and flow in their career where they've lost sight of what gives them joy and why they're practicing their sport. And let's face it, sport or any kind of significant endeavor will be difficult, will be challenging, will not be an easy journey, especially if you're trying to achieve something, at a very high level. And so it's like the challenge that you're going through has to be meaningful to you in some way, otherwise, you're going to give up and throw in the towel, and that's okay. So it's like finding the meaning in why this tournament was important to you, and then but connected to that could also just be finding, the joy, and so joy or positivity is a practice. Some you might think that some people are, born, positive and some born negative, but it's actually shown that you can, whether you're born negative or born positive, like half glass full, half glass empty, through practice you can shift your how you sort of see situations. And of course, our negativity bias tends to kind of act like Velcro. We'll notice the 10 things that went wrong with our day. And then we're like, okay, well, what, then you just even taking that moment at the end of the day, it's like, okay, what what were some of the things I can acknowledge myself for? What went well, and or what's going well in this moment in this tennis game?
Mhm.
And like,
Right.
okay, well, my backhand's doing pretty good, so I'll just focus on my backhand, and then all of a sudden you're focusing on the things that are actually, you can acknowledge yourself for actually working well, and then and then you're like, all of a sudden my day, oh, see, my day wasn't so bad after all. My whole perspective of my day was horrible, but then I did these three other things that actually kind of gave me a lot of hope. And then the same can happen in the kind of circumstances you just kind of described as well.
That's really valuable. And, thinking of the broader concept of reframing, and I wonder how you've worked with so many athletes over a long time and you had your own highs and lows, but, you can look at an athlete that maybe they finished out of the medals at the Olympics. However, they are among the 0.0001 best,
Yeah.
athletes in that sport in the world. And so, and if, ideally, hopefully they have another shot. That I can understand is when it's a little tougher at that point, if that's really their last shot. However, that's too, leads to new open doors with all of the discipline and skills and the mindset that they've put together to get that far. So just to get to the, the broader concept, which is, I think, partly what you're talking about too, of reframing, and any comments you have on that helps people.
Yeah, reframing perspective. I think, sometimes it's, in the moment it's not possible, and you might have to, a bit of time and perspective on an Olympic career or an Olympic moment. And, you know, almost every Olympian that I've spoken to or have spoken at, say, conferences I've used to organize, they'll always talk about, they might have three medals, but it's really not about the medal. It's around I don't know, the journey, or who they became through the process of trying to win a medal. And so
Wonderful.
in the
Wonderful.
moment when you just come forth and you're off the podium, and it may not, it's a hard consolation, but this is where, even when you, and it even comes back to the meaningful, what is meaningful about this journey for you. Is it a podium or nothing, or is there other aspects of this journey that are
Huge.
or what other objectives do you have other than the podium or the outcome objectives? And so it could be um, the pure joy and some intrinsic motivations for doing what you love to do as a sport, and also have gratitude for being able to, say, go to the Olympics and do what you do and train. It could be about having inspired your community or young person, kind of thing, representing your country. So there's all kinds of things that, and having experienced this, and obviously your friends and teammates can play a big role in all of that as well. So sort of having a multi-dimensional perspective on your sort of performance journey, I think, can help when you have when you might have a performance that's not what you kind of hoped it to be. I mean, uh, other than the Olympic champion, everyone else is going to lose. So it's like,
Yeah.
like in an outcome perspective,
Right.
kind of thing, So, but it doesn't mean that you still don't go for it, and you still don't, even if it's a high bar. But and then, if as you're showing up, it's sort of putting yourself out there and doing your best, and having a kind of no regrets kind of attitude
Yeah.
towards anything, and you can walk away with your head held high regardless of the kind of outcome.
That's a wonderful observation, and so useful and applicable across the board for people, because, if it's a one-legged stool, so to speak, where it's all or nothing to be the gold medalist or the champion or the winner of anything, then that one leg is going to get kicked out from under most people and just go. But like you say, there's a solid platform when you have multiple reasons, including the joy of the experience and the process and the relationships and who it makes you become, that can really provide a stronger base for after the games are over, after your particular objective is now behind you. So I like that a lot. I wanted to ask you, and I know that you've been writing quite a lot at different times, and more recently have written some very interesting pieces, a couple of which I've seen on LinkedIn. But so if you wanted to share any observations about those, and the broader context of mental health versus, mental illness and different situations people are in, and how they, people try to optimize, I guess, for themselves, their own situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for that, Jeff. And I noticed that you've liked and read some of my LinkedIn articles, and it's interesting. At the beginning of this year, I said, okay, I'm going to write 50 pieces on LinkedIn once a week about, and I used to be held back on my writing because I used to sort of think about, who's going to read it, and how many people are going to think it's relevant, or this kind of thing. I used to kind of go through that kind of process, and so I kind of shifted quite a bit actually in terms of just sort of unapologetically sort of putting stuff out there. And so in those that writing that I do once a week is really it's really for myself, mostly, and if people can take something from it, then I'm really pleased
I'm
pleased
sure
about that.
I'm sure lots of people are, and I certainly did, and I think it has a ton of value. So I'm glad you're putting it out there.
And in some ways, it's for me taking some of my recent academic learnings that I've done through mindfulness or through well-being, and taking some kind of key concepts and then contextualizing them to my day job and my day to day. And so sometimes it's, there's a lot of complex aspects of things, and it's sort of like, okay, well, it's sort of a process to kind of put stuff out there. On the mental, so I speak about mindfulness. I talk about performance context. I talk about well-being, mostly in elite sport, and so in terms of, I had mental health, sort of kind of a calling for a kind of a new paradigm for mental health in sport, and that journey in our Canadian sport system, as I mentioned earlier, has been evolving over the last few years since 2019. The IOC produced a kind of a guidelines or toolkit for mental health in 2021. So it's like all of these things are sort of now kind of moving along, but they're still evolving, and so. And a big part of this is like, okay, well, the pathological approach to mental health and mental illness versus more of a kind of a salutogenic approach to mental health, and shifting, from treating it, we talked about stigma as well, and like sort of the stigma of mental illness versus mental health, and to sort of to the sort of this idea that you might have no mental illness, but it doesn't guarantee that you're mentally healthy.
Right.
And so even into purpose, so you also might be languishing or having a low mental health, but it doesn't mean you have mental illness. There's nothing wrong with you, or there's nothing broken, there's nothing to be fixed. And so, I mean, a useful way to kind of think about this is that you might have no physical illness, but it doesn't guarantee that you're physically fit. And so, but you're otherwise healthy, but you're maybe not, you're not physically fit. And so, if you have low mental health, there's nothing wrong with you. You might feel stuck. You might have more incidents of negative thoughts or less positive thoughts. Typically you might have a feeling of sort of languishing kind of thing. And so, but you're otherwise not mentally, ill, and so how you can kind of move up the sort of the continuum from, low mental health to sort of high mental health, where you might have a feeling of sort of thriving or flourishing or having a sense of purpose and meaning and having more positive outlook on things, and so, but on average, I would say most of us have moderate mental health, which is sort of somewhere between the two, and so, yeah, so I think it's an important thing to think about in terms of, like, when we're ill and we go the doctor, and we have blood tests for just screening purposes for our general health. We can do that as well for mental illness, and so we even can do that, or mental health. So we can do that even with all the athletes I work with. We do an annual screening and so that's reviewed by a doctor, and then allows us to kind of identify if there's signs or symptoms that could might require kind of a prognosis and a sort of a diagnosis, and that's sort of the pathological aspect of things, the sort of looking at sort of source of illness. And so that's part of the process, the same way you might approach your own physical health. It's like, just sort of, preventing illness. So that's one way to look at things. And there's also what I refer to the salutogenic way, but it's sort of what am I doing to promote health? And so there's our health potential is within us, and it's always in a process of developing. And so what do we like? So the same way, how we can move from physical fitness to low physical fitness to higher physical fitness, we can, go for walks and do exercise and eat and sleep and do that. And then what are there the things that we can do for our mental health? And so, and what are we doing? And so we might actually not feel like we need to, but it's like, well, because there's no crisis happening, but even in the absence of crisis doesn't mean we have high mental health. We can still have low mental health, and so it's like, okay, what are the kind of the little things that we can be doing to kind of moving us towards, an idea of flourishing, or, and then I love how you've kind of on your pin to purpose, it's sort of the continuum towards purpose, because if you're flourishing, you have a sense of purpose and meaning in terms of your work, or showing up in life in things that are in a meaningful way that's meaningful to you personally.
That's great. I with the initiative now, I'm doing some workshops, and I have a business partner named Tatiana Petruka, who is originally from the Ukraine. We were doing one a bit earlier today, and it's interesting, the concept of like the difference between passion and purpose, and talking about how, passion is something that we really love and care about, but normally it's for ourselves, and it becomes purpose when it's you take your passion in service of others. So when you're uplifting, you feel that real energizing connection by translating something you really love and care about, but in the service of others, which is part of that healing process, or part of the lifting of the bar, as that, using that metaphor again. So I'm really enjoying, exploring these concepts with great guests like yourself. And I think we've covered a ton of ground, Derek, but I wanted to, leave it over to you if there are other things you'd like to say, or any final words, or to about the topics. And, there are a lot of people out there, as there always will be, obviously, who are going through mental health challenges, or who have mental health conditions that, having guests like you on and others is very helpful to hear new stories, get new reference points, realize they're not alone, and they're certainly not weak, but right now they're in a weakened state, and, deserve the dignity as they would automatically have, that nobody would hold against them to get on a healing journey if they had a physical ailment. We hopefully will get to that point in the not too distant future, where everybody feels, since mental and physical health are intrinsic parts of being alive, that they can reach out and, to somebody they trust at least. And there's a lot of resources to get on a healing journey. So I've gone on a little bit there. It's kind of my little passionate end here, but I also wanted to hand it back to you, Derek, if there's other things you'd like to share or talk about. And it's always, great to see you. And actually, for our viewers, as a bit of a joke, but not a joke, we've had the odd beanbag competition together, and just for fun, over a beer or two. And so I've challenged Derek, because, although we're going to see who wins the next one at some point. But anyway,
yeah, I think you're ahead on that game, Jeff. So we'll have to do that before winter.
Yeah, snow on the beanbags, or ice around the holes might be at another level of difficulty. But I know you're an Olympian and I'm not, so I think I'm a little worried about that. So,
Yeah, I love the work that you're doing in terms of you're not fixed, you're not broken. If you're feeling stuck, you're just feeling maybe stuck, and I think the most powerful thing that we can kind of start to appreciate, and it might take a little bit of time to appreciate this, and the only place you need to get to is the place that you already are. And so the, everything, all of your potential is already within you. And so I talked earlier around your health potential. We're always in the process of developing our mental health. And so, and that capacity is not out there. It's not at some future state. It's not when we achieve this or when we do that, or when my current circumstances will be better. Um, and that's sort of the trap that we kind of find ourselves in. We're always sort of looking outside of ourselves for solutions to the stuckness that we might be feeling. And so the key to sort of unlocking it is within us. It's not held by somebody else. And you might have people in your entourage or professional or family and friends that can help guide you through this, but ultimately these are all sort of individual. These resources are within you to kind of build the capacity towards flourishing or thriving or some version, whatever version of that is meaningful for you. So I think that's an important thing that I've kind of come to appreciate over the years.
And do you connect that concept with gratitude? Like if you think of focusing on gratitude, does that tie in either in parallel or together?
Yeah, and I think gratitude is part of a kind of a positive psychology, practice or intervention. So we every day, as I mentioned earlier, you can sort of what can you acknowledge yourself for, and I mean even like clean water and a roof over our head and living in a free democratic society. We often take all that for granted. And so just when half the world doesn't take that for granted. And so just even putting those kind of things in perspective, I think can be hugely beneficial in terms of our appreciation for for uh, for who we are in this moment and our this it's a life is a sort of a process to be experienced, and so you might actually be experiencing difficult circumstances financially in your relationship, in the business, in your career, or whatever. So it's not about it's not about judging yourself or criticizing yourself for where you might find yourself. It's like, well, this is just the version of me right now, and it's my version. There's nothing, it's this, there's nothing broken or fixed, or I'm not a failure. It's like, okay, well, this is who I am right now,
Right.
and who I am in a day from now, or in a week, or 5 years from now, are based on the choices I'm making in this moment. And so it's like this sort of, you talk about purpose and personal meaningfulness, collective meaningfulness, but there's also a directedness, a kind of there's a goal directedness, so there's like, what direction are you moving in, and if you're feeling sort of stuck and feeling like you have no direction, the direction can reveal itself, either through specific goals, but also through just what is it about life that's meaningful to me, and just kind of listening to those little things. So if it's playing a sport or doing a hobby or certain relationships or certain practices in your career and stuff like that, just sort of listen to those kind of things, and those are the kind of things that maybe at our age, maybe the things that we always wanted to do when we were in our 20s that we kind of put aside and never thought we could do. And it's like, okay, coming back to those little sort of whispers of things and kind of move in those directions, and that's kind of gives you what gives you some direction, and it could just be a little thing that then turns into a bigger thing that turns into another thing, and then the dots kind of connect, and so having gone through a couple of career transitions in my life and ups and downs, it's like, it's like moving through all of that is challenging But there are ways, through family, friends, and people around us to kind of help guide us through that. But also ultimately, all of this capacity to move through things is within us.
Oh, that's very well said. And at the end of the day, that's, we need to be able to reach out. We can't get completely isolated in our own thoughts or being pinned, and to find those next steps or the new paths that you're talking about. Life is a complete team game, and it's beautifully played as a team. Imagine hockey and you go out on the ice and you say, okay, it's all about me. No, it's a team. Any sport, any team sport is a team. So,
yeah.
But
anyway.
and
well, one last thing, like just even getting a snapshot, well-being is a multidimensional concept, and it's usually about 7 to 9 dimensions of your well-being. And you can do a life score or a heat map of your well-being across, physical, mental, emotional, professional, spiritual, community, social, so you can get a snapshot and you can kind of like, okay, well, these are the areas I need to work on. And that can help you kind of sort of help. These are all different ways that can help you move forward as well.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I will be for our viewers, I will definitely in the write-up give a link to your profile, and if anybody who wants to reach out to explore, given the work that you do, and be, potentially work with you or get some more feedback, can reach out to Derek Covington. So Derek, my great pleasure. I really appreciate this conversation and the insights you've shared with everybody today on this episode of the Pin to Purpose podcast. So thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jeff.